Shopify grows your business no matter how far or big you grow. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Whether you're selling your fans' next favorite shirt or an exclusive piece of podcast merch, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Allbirds, Rothy's, Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in.
This interview contains graphic depictions of violence and gore. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. In partnership with the Honor Project, we've brought this podcast back at a time when our nation needs these stories more than ever. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for listening, and by doing so, honoring those who have served. Today, in a special Memorial Day episode, we'll be hearing from Master Sergeant Earl Plumlee. Plumlee served in Afghanistan as an Army Green Beret and was awarded the Medal of Honor for the role he played in defending Forward Operating Base Ghazni. In just 9 minutes, he neutralized several enemies, survived multiple close-range blasts, and emerged with only minor injuries.
Earl Plumlee, Master Sergeant, retired U.S. Army, and I was a Green Beret. I started as a weapons sergeant and then ended up as a team sergeant on a ODA. I came from a military family. I was always going to join the military. Where I ended up was kind of up for debate, depending on how my childhood was going and what movies were out. I found out you could join the military with just a GED. And so I went down to the Marine recruiter to try to join when I was still in high school as a sophomore. And they were like, yeah, no, that's not how it works. It's after your class graduates. If you have a GED, we can take you. It's not a get out of jail free card. So anyway, he said the National Guard would take you. So I went down, talked to the National Guard recruiter, ended up joining the National Guard as a sophomore in high school, and did 2 years in the Army National Guard, the Oklahoma National Guard, as a 13 Mike. So that's a MLRS crewman. So I'm really enjoying the Ukrainian war because I'm like, see, we told you what it could do. Because the MLRS was a magnificent system and never really got to demonstrate what it was capable of on the battlefield. Because, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, it wasn't a big player just because of overwhelming air power. And obviously the 20-year occupation, you didn't need a system like that. So, well, what it smells like is BO because you're usually been driving around for a couple of days in the cab with no AC. So it smells like, arguably a worse version of the infantry, because to me, that stagnant smell of guys just kind of sitting is worse than guys that are out there moving around the brush. It's impressive, though. If you're sitting in that track and, that big, heavy track, I don't know what they weigh, but it's, for the layperson, it's a tank, and it shakes every bit of it, everything in there. You feel that 300 millimeter rocket jerking out of there. It's impressive. It was a neat job, especially for a high school kid to go out and drive a tank on the weekends, but it wasn't my adventure. I wanted to be out there in the very, very front, sneaking around the weeds. So ultimately, when I graduated high school, I joined the Marine Corps on an infantry contract, and had a new manner of suffering defined for me. Some of it was a culture shock. Obviously, there is a gigantic gulf in between the Marine Corps infantry and the National Guard field artillery. But, you still have to work with people from all over the country. You still have to get the job done. And so for that, especially after basic training, after the School of Infantry, I was ahead of my peers and like understanding the relationship between the ranks, how tasks were given out, and how you get things done. I joined in peacetime, so I was just looking to travel the world and drink beer and whatever ports that they would put me in. And so 9/11 happened. My very first year in the Marine Corps, I was forward deployed in Okinawa as part of a UDP, a unit deployment program. And that's one of my big pivots from military adventure to being in the profession of arms in a time of war. And that's really one of those first steps where this isn't a cute little adventure. This is a big deal. This is, a real life war. I figured that out fairly early on, because even before war, the infantry and the field artillery are dangerous places. And, accidents when you're moving around heavy equipment in the field artillery, if you're not paying attention and you're taking a lackadaisical approach, you'll kill somebody. You'll drive over them with the track. If you do improper maintenance on that thing and the hydraulics fail, you get smashed by a box that weighs, 40,000 pounds. And especially growing up in Western Oklahoma in the oil field, I think the gravity of your decisions can impact not just your life, but those around you, came pretty early. So I think I took that into the military, where I was always, kind of fun and cracking jokes, but I also, understood when to be serious and when to tighten it up a little bit and pay attention so that you didn't kill somebody. The infantry is already an arduous life. I was already out living that life, living out of my ruck, carrying everything I own, moving, not just every day, sometimes moving a couple times a day and a couple times a night, and distances that most people would consider in an extreme circumstances only. I think every time we started walking, we knew we were going to walk 5 or 6 miles. That would be a short movement. And usually we had a 12 or 15 mile hike at the conclusion of every single training evolution in the infantry. So I was already a fairly hardened person. And then I got to the reconnaissance community and it was all the same stuff, except for, the tempo was a lot higher. So, I think I did something fairly physically aggressive every day of the week. And my weekends became very precious because, things weren't hurting. But it was like jumping into cold water. But I got used to it. And, within a couple months, it's not different anymore. That's just your lifestyle. And of course, you're running 5 miles at 4 o'clock in the morning on Monday because we have to get our run in so we'd be ready to swim when the sun comes up. Several times throughout my career, even in the infantry, I was like, I can't believe I get to do this. I remember in the infantry, we hiked to the top of Mauna Kea on the Big Island. And I just remember, my every muscle in my body is just, feels like it's got Quikrete in it. And I have blisters all over my feet, but then turning around and looking off that mountain. And, I got paid to be here today. Recon was the same thing. Out driving boats around Hawaii, people pay, vast sums of money to get out and ride a boat away. It's a little different, it's not a black rigid inflatable, and they're usually doing it in the sunshine instead of the middle of the night. But I've had that experience my entire career. Is I can't believe I get to be here today with these people. And I don't cry because I'm too tough, but a lesser man would. So my first deployment was about a week after 9/11. We didn't know we were going to Afghanistan when I deployed forward. We didn't know where we were going, but I ended up going to Bahrain and was a shipboard security detachment for the USNS ships, the Merchant Marines. Every Merchant Marine ship got 5 or 6 Marines on it to support the build-up for the invasion of Afghanistan. So I was super pumped because I got to go first. Unfortunately, I was too soon, so I had to support other formations as they invaded Afghanistan. But even then, I saw neat things. I saw the JSOC task force on the carriers at sea. We saw the 160th birds. So I was there for some pretty neat benchmarks in history. except for, I was a private standing a post instead of an operator getting to go through the door first. What drew me to recon, it was an elite unit or an elite formation inside the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps itself is already, an elite organization. So, I wanted to be there. I wanted to work with the best guys. And, but really what got me is I wanted to be the first to go. I wanted the important missions, and, recon's where you do that in the Marine Corps. Kind of hard. So I didn't realize the Marine Corps was like, yeah, cool, go do recon, but you promised us 4 years in the infantry. So why don't you knock that out first? And honestly, I talked to young guys and girls trying to do these, elite formations. And actually, the Marine Corps did me a favor because recon didn't want nothing to do with Private Plumlee. They were very impressed with Sergeant Plumlee, but I didn't bring a lot to the table those first couple of years that they would have been interested in. We did an extra platoon out of 2nd Force, which was, whatever recon Marines they could find from the reserve or active duty, they built a platoon, and we deployed to Iraq in 2005. And it was everything that I had been searching for it seemed to me as a young man, those many years, but now looking back, it only took me really 3 years to get to the place I wanted to be. But we went to Iraq, and we had the direct action mission out of Al-Assad, and it was, special operations movie stuff. We flew out of a small air or HLZ right next to our living area. We'd fly out, prosecute targets, and be back for breakfast. And it was, I felt pretty important. I had really big britches on me at that time, and was pretty proud of myself. That was my first warfighter deployment. I think that's, when I kind of figured out I was slightly more adept, just emotionally more cut out for combat. The stress of driving over the IED roads every day, the stress of, is this house going to be an ambush or a VBID or HBID, started wearing people down. And then also we started, taking casualties. So every mission wasn't a perfect win. So guys started getting wounded, and a friend of mine, Seamus Davey, was killed. And, so you start kind of rectifying that this cool wartime adventure has a cost to it. And I started to see that. That's something that I think everybody, when they get to combat, they think, am I the main character? And then you start seeing, especially more physically fit, more well-spoken, smarter guys, stronger guys, better guys get killed in just these, lackluster type of deaths. And you're like, man, that could have been me. The sniper had to shoot somebody, and his story stops here today at 20, And so to insulate myself from it, because I saw people struggling, and it served me well throughout my career, was I'm going to make sure that I do the best that I can every time. That way, if one of my friends gets killed, that was the enemy's fault, not my fault. And I think it's really important for warfighters to insulate themselves with that. There was nothing more I could have done on the battlefield to prevent that friendly casualty. Because if you don't know that, it eats at you. And I've seen guys be completely consumed by it, 20 years later. It's one of those, you can explain it to a guy, and until he forgives himself, it falls on deaf ears. You can explain it to him 100 times. You can give them the tools, but until they actually realize that when you go to war, the enemy gets a vote and who gets to go home. And it's why we, honestly should avoid war at all costs. Well, not all costs, but to only undertake it under the gravest of circumstances. But when it is time to go to war, we should go as well prepared and as violently as possible, because you never want to come in as the nice guy and get your unit just absolutely obliterated, because you never get to take that back. So, and I've explained it to people I've served with, that wasn't your fault he got killed. And there's always these what ifs and these tiny minutia. They're like, if I had got up and had breakfast earlier, I'd have been more alert and I probably would have spotted that guy. Like, probably not. I don't think you can be more alert when you're rolling up on a house expecting a gunfight. I've never driven up to Al-Qaeda safe house and been sleepy as we rolled into the front gate. But You got to throw that to the things you can control, control them well, and the things that you can't, you have to understand that you can't. We all take turns walking point with the knowledge that, more than likely somebody's going to, sacrifice himself for the formation. It could be you or it could be your buddy. Unless you're a fortune teller, it's not your call. When you get your mission brief, you're excited, or at least I was. Every time I get a good mission, you're like, hey, high probability that this important person is going to be this place tonight, and we're going to go. That's the purpose of all the selections. That's the purpose of all the effort you put to be in an elite formation. So for me, it was always very exciting. And then usually about the time we start infill is when I would start thinking, does he know we're coming? What's his plan? Because he's got to know we're coming eventually. Like if you're in Al-Qaeda leadership position, that we're coming. One night we're going to be there. So to think that they haven't taken any precautions is pretty childish. So you start wondering, like, what's this guy's game plan? Is he a runner or is he a fighter? What are we going to find here? And then usually I settled down as we kind of left the last cover and conceal position. And at that point, it doesn't matter what his plan is, because what's going to happen is going to happen. Either we're going to catch him sleeping, or he was ready for us and it's going to be a gunfight. We've done all there is nothing left to think about. We've done our rehearsals. We've made our plan. And now the only thing we have to do is violent execution. And really the only thing you can do to guarantee failure on the objective is to not do violent execution. If you start having, what I always call it is you make a good plan before you start drinking. Don't come up with a new one while you're drinking. And to me, combat's like that. Is when you see where the X is and where the gunfight's going to happen, that's not the time to let the good idea fairies come in. We made a plan in a room with all of us coming up with the best course of action, and now we're going to do it, regardless of how scary your part of that plan is. And next time, maybe come up with a better plan if this part's too scary. I live for the deployments. Through one marriage away, she said, if you deploy again, I'll leave you. And I went to work immediately following that conversation and volunteered for the very next deployment. So I wanted to be the guy. And I guess I had what I thought was payback that I owed the people I served with. My first battalion ended up going to Fallujah and took a lot of casualties, and I wasn't there for them. I was off chasing to me, I was chasing delusions of grandeur. I went to become a force recon Marine, and they all went to war. And if I'd known they were going, I would have went with them. So I spent a good portion of my career just paying back, not being there for those guys. Because that was my first turn. I was a squad leader in the infantry, and I sent my young guys to war without me so I could go, chase my career. And it kind of ate at me for years. I put myself in front of every dangerous situation as often as possible to, pay that debt I felt that I owed those guys, and drank too much and drove too fast and got in bar fights at 2 a.m. 20-year-old Marine stuff. I was once again bummed out. Our site that my ODA had got shut down, and I had a choice between go home or work at the company headquarters. No Green Beret is pumped about either of those. And if he is, he should probably give his beret back. But, I was not going to be at home while my guys were deployed again. Just like that Phantom Fury thing that I missed. I was not going to do that again. So I stayed in the company headquarters on Forward Ghazni and took a support role. I was the weapons sergeant for the company headquarters. That is not a warfighting function. That's logistics, deep logistics for the ODAs. They send broke guns. I go get them fixed at depot level. They send up their ammunition consumption, and I try to guess what they're going to use next month so that I can have it ordered and shipped and keep them topped off. And then if they get in a bad gunfight, I have their emergency resupply bundles. So it's really a lot of book work. If they're out on patrol, I have to look at what their weapons are and their manning, and build the appropriate bundle for them. So it's maybe interesting to some people, but it's not exciting work. And as I'm doing that, the Taliban selected Fob Ghazni as a site for a what we call a spectacular complex attack. They knew that we were going to close the FOB, so they figured it's a win-win. They can come in and just eviscerate the camp and we'll leave, or they'll come in, lose militarily, or tactically, but since they know we're going to close it anyway, they can still claim that information victory and say, see, we ran them out of town. I didn't know that at the time, so to me, it was just an annoyance. We were getting indirect fire fairly frequently. I thought it was just for harassment, but what it was is they had informants and Taliban fighters that were on the camp, working as laborers that were recording where the rounds were landing and recording, what steps the camp took when under attack, and the high density areas of the camp for populations of soldiers, so that when they came in and wanted to get those mass casualties, they knew the areas of the camp to hit. So you fast forward about a month of that, just them harassing us, and they arranged for 3 truck bombs, 2 5,000 pounders and 1 20,000 pounder maneuvered to the camp. The 5,000 pounder detonated across the camp for me on an exterior wall, and 15 Taliban fighters with suicide vests, brand new Chinese rifles, brand new Chinese armor-piercing incendiary ammunition, and brand new Chinese hand grenades rapidly maneuvered through that breach point and headed for the interior of the camp. I didn't know that. They didn't give me the warning order, so I just knew the bomb went off, and I heard their base of fire. They had 2 machine guns covering their ingress into the camp, and I know what talking gun sounds like. That's when you have 2 guns working back and forth to conserve ammunition and the operational envelope of the gun, but to lay down a massive amount of suppressive fire. I know what that sounds like, and I grabbed my gear and headed toward the sound of the guns, so to speak. As we're headed down there, start picking up all my buddies that were pretty much my team was manning the company headquarters. So my old warrant was the company warrant. My intelligence sergeant from my ODA was the company intelligence sergeant. And, Nate Abkemeyer was a support soldier who I'd, gotten close with in the company headquarters. And we all linked up and moved down to that breach point independently, but we, all got together as we headed down there. I was a sniper, and I had a sniper rifle. So as we got to the last cover and conceal position, I had Nate slow down in the vehicle we were in. Matt Horde and Chief Colbert on a 4-wheeler pulled just past us. And as soon as they broke around that corner, they both got hit with small arms fire. And then they were, both obviously hit, and then both very obviously under a huge amount of small arms fire. We could see it hitting all around them, but we couldn't see where it was coming from. But that's fine, because we have a battle drill for that. We've rehearsed it, about 1 million times. We pull the vehicle in between the good guys and the bad guys, dismount, and either load up the casualties and maneuver more, or you fight it out there. Unfortunately, I kicked my door open as we made that turn, and instead of being across the camp or out on the flight line, I thought we had more space. We pulled right in the middle of what was their rally point. So we pulled in literally into the middle of a circle of about 12 fighters, and they all faced inboard and started directing their fire into our truck. Pulled my rifle up and tried to go to work and fired 1 round. My rifle jammed. Yeah, it's never jammed before, and it never jammed after, but for this story, it jams. And I was kind of like, well, I've seen it before. I guess I'm the guy today that dies at the very start of the gunfight and doesn't get to participate. So I've been trained, in the Marine Corps and in Special Forces over and over again. When the rifle goes down, pistol comes out, and I just stepped out of the truck and started closing with the nearest group of enemy fighters. And, my hope was I could buy enough time for Nate and Drew to figure something out. So I, just presented my pistol and just started indexing back and forth between the fighters as fast as I could. Well, not as fast as I could, because as soon as I pulled my pistol, I broke 1 round. Who knows where it went? And I had that just voice. It was like, hey, if you don't actually put good hits on targets, there's absolutely no way you're getting out of this. So I, steadied up my front sight tip and, try to remain as calm as possible as I just indexed from target to target, and just started closing with them as I went and slowly moving at an oblique angle off to their left and my right, trying to get to concealment. I got right in the middle of them and, ran my pistol was about dry. And, I was shocked and they were surprised as they never hit me for whatever reason. I guess they got too excited. But left me right in the middle of these guys, and I needed time. And the only thing I could come up with was I'd have 5 seconds while this hand grenade cooked off. So pulled a hand grenade out, cooked it off for what I thought in my head was 2 seconds, but I was probably counting just about as fast as you could count. So it was probably about 0.02 of a second, and just kind of stepped out and tossed it in the general direction of the fighters, which it worked. As soon as I stepped out with that hand grenade, everybody, ran for the hills except for one guy who I'd hit with my pistol. And can't tell, but I remember indexing down off of their vests into their pelvic girdle. So I think I hit him in the hips and dropped him, because I remember as I broke that pistol round, he just dropped like somebody cut the strings on a marionette. I remember being shocked because you always hear, 9mm doesn't have stopping power. And for me, I fired one round at him and he, disappeared out of my sight picture. But he was still sitting there, and just by luck, that grenade, when I tossed it, landed right between the ground and his hip. And he never tried to roll off of it. He didn't try and swat it away. He just pulled his rifle up and tracked me behind that water tank. And then the whole time I was working on my rifle, he was just shooting through that water tank. And I still remember, very clearly as I was, working on my rifle, dumping the mag and locking the bolt, I remember little pieces of white plastic sprinkling down on me, because every time one of his bullets would go through it, it pulled just a tiny little plastic snowflake off with it. But he never hit me. So whoever wrote the manual, concealment is not cover, but it serves just as well. The enemy can't observe you. Yep, totally right, because he shot everywhere except for where I was back there kneeling working on my gun. I had my rifle up at this point and started hearing rounds hitting the berm behind me. And I turn out to my left and rear, and a fighter is about 100 meters from me in a sling-supported prone position, just laying out there, driving them in. And I knew it was 100 meters because, we're on base. This is literally where I do sprints in the morning. So I dropped to a knee, held my rifle right on the notch of his neck, pulled the trigger, and he vaporized off the face of the earth, which shocked me because that doesn't usually happen when you shoot people. They don't usually explode, in my experience. Some people have a different experience. But I remember, even 100 meters is fairly close to be from a suicide vest. And it was incredibly loud. I was on my knee and I jumped to my feet and I was looking around the airfield trying to figure out what just happened. My first thought was that a Polish tank had come up and hit him with their main gun, but there was no tanks out there yet. And I couldn't see any other weapon system. And it kind of dawned on me that exactly when I broke that round, this guy detonated. And I was like, that guy had a suicide vest on and I shot it. And I had a little small internal victory because, every sniper wants to put in his logbook, engaged suicide vest guy and detonated it. So I had that story. I was like, cool. And as I was kind of getting a survey of the land, I'm at this little 4-way intersection and, I saw some fighters run off to my left and I saw a bunch to my right and front had run back down this little alley when I threw the grenade. And I didn't know what their plan was. And I was aware of the Bastion attack on the Marine Corps. The whole point of it was they were trying to destroy all the aircraft. So I kind of had maybe a suspicion that they were going after all the aircraft that the Poles had. And I couldn't go back to where my guys were, just around this little corner I'm at. I could hear them yelling for a medic. And I knew if I went back to where they were, if the fighters came back, they'd be right on top of us. So I figured I'll develop the tactical environment with one Earl Plumlee and went down to where I'd seen them take off to. And I got about halfway down this little alley, and they hung muzzles from cover and started engaging me. And I was shooting on the move, moving off to a generator panel off to my right, and trying to keep them suppressed as best I could. And I got most of the way to this little panel, and my rifle ran dry. And I had this big, huge rifle, 20-inch barrel on it. And I knew my pistol only had like a round or two left, and I had all these guys to my front. So I knew if I was going to get out of this, I'd need that rifle back up. So instead of transitioning to my pistol, I went for a reload on my rifle and dumped the magazine and super elevated my muzzle. And as soon as I did that, the nearest fighter to me threw his rifle into his sling and broke from cover and just started sprinting toward me. And lucky for me and unlucky for him is I practiced reloading vastly more than he practiced sprinting, because I put a fresh mag in, sent the bolt home, and he was only about half the distance to me, which still put him at around that 10 to 12 meter line, and pulled the trigger and detonated his vest. And luckily, I pulled him behind that generator panel, so it directed a little bit of the blast and caught all the frag and just knocked me off my feet. And I was laying there going, man, that was a close one. And another fighter came walking up, looking over his sights, trying to finish me off on the ground there. And, he just wasn't using his sights, and he was trying to shoot while walking, which is, kind of an advanced skill. He wasn't quite pulling it off. And all his rounds were landing just a little bit short, about, 12 inches, 15 inches short. So I pulled my rifle back up and hammered away at him, folded him up, got to my feet, and then started engaging his buddies that were covering his movement. And, my rifle ran dry again. So rather than find out if I could pull that feed off one more time, I dumped the magazine and pivoted and ran back to the corner where I was at. I was also kind of curious where all my friends were that I brought with me. I was like, that scar's pretty loud, and I've been throwing hand grenades, and surely somebody heard this suicide vest detonate. They, where the hell's everybody at? And they had their own problems, because, when I ran around the corner, bumped right into Drew, who'd gotten out of the truck just as fast as he could, but just one of those freak of nature things. Every round that missed me either hit Drew or hit Nate Abkemeyer when I stepped out of the truck. And then one of the rounds came through and hit the child safety locks. So it was a civilian vehicle, it was a Toyota Tacoma, and it still had the child safety lock mechanism in the door. It had an up armor panels and stuff, but it still had child safety locks on it. And this round came through and hit the lever on it. So Drew tried to follow me and couldn't, because he was locked in the back seat, which I think is funny. Drew gets aggravated about it. Anyway, he's jumped out of the truck and he saw me obviously, advance on him with my pistol. Just doesn't know where I've been since. But I crash into him. I tell him, hey, Drew, I know right where they're at. Let's go get them. And, he's like, all right, let's go. So I step back around that lane on the far right side of the alley, and Drew takes the far left. And it's a lot funner doing gunfights with a friend, because you only have to look a couple places instead of all the places. And we start going back down this little alley. And the last guy I shot is just kind of laying in the lane there, and he's smoking, not a lot, but a little. And Drew is looking like he's going to step over that guy. And so I yell at Drew, like, hey, stay away from them. They got suicide vests on, which, kind of gets him to flex up a little bit. And he's like, what? And I'm like, stay away from the bodies. They all have suicide vests on. And as he's figuring that out, and as I'm, telling him, that vest goes low order, which doesn't explode, but it burns, except for it's high explosive. So it's a pretty spectacular type of burn. It was like a 20-foot blowtorch, just as powerful as a match flaring up, except for, 30-pound of match. And, Drew, runs over, and I'm back behind this generator panel again, and I got Drew with me. And whether it was this guy's hand grenades or if they all just started throwing hand grenades at it, eventually it evolved into, they had little buddy teams. One guy would suppress us with his rifle, then his buddy would chuck hand grenades at us, which was working pretty good at keeping me and Drew pinned behind that panel. So we're fighting it out, and lucky for Drew and I, we were so close. We're fighting at about 15 meters from each other at this point, and everything's on fire. There's smoke everywhere, so you can't see well. I remember, moving my head around as this thick smoke would billow back and forth in between us, and they were throwing their grenades so hard that they would hit the wall behind us and then bounce back into the middle and detonate. So it was, equally detrimental to both sides of the fight. But if they'd have rolled one slow in there, probably would have finished us off. And we're going back and forth at this. I actually got hit in the top of my plate carrier with a hand grenade, and was messing around flicking that thing back. And they finally got one into the fighting position behind that panel with Drew and I, which was emotional event for both of us. We were both kicking that thing all over the place. And Drew grabbed me and said, "Hey, we got to get out of here. They're going to kill us." He said that. I don't remember that because I couldn't hear anything because everything was just exploding. But I'll take him at his word. But he grabbed me and jerked me into a run. We took about 5 or 6 steps back toward the pickup truck in the little corner, and we both got blown off of our feet. I remember trying to get up, and I was trying to get my rifle back into my shoulder, and I couldn't. And the buttstock had been folded up, and I was trying to mess with it. And I looked down inside my buttstock and my sling, and there was a human arm from about just below the elbow down, had ripped in at Mach 5 and hit my buttstock and knocked my rifle out of my hands and broke the buttstock of my rifle. And I remember very vividly, it looked like a hand, it had hand, fingers, and an arm, but when I grabbed it, all the bone was just gelatinized. So it felt more like a big squid tentacle, which was offensive to my senses because I remember picking that thing up and just being, grossed out by it. Picked it up and ran around that corner, figured out that, half an arm wasn't going to help me win the gunfight, so got rid of it. And we're sitting there, a Polish tank drove up, and I was like, oh, easy, perfect. We'll get this tank spun around in here and have him drive right through the middle of them, and, the battle will be over. And the Polish tank commander was sitting real tall in his turret, and I was yelling at him, and he couldn't hear me. That machine gun base of fire in the house had an amount of fighters. I forget what they said were in there. They also had brought a ton of RPGs. And as the Polish armor had moved into that gap to kind of block that, what was ended up being like, I think, a 60-meter hole in the exterior wall, that base of fire started engaging the Polish armor with RPGs. So they were out there in that gap, fighting it out, catching RPGs to their armor. Me yelling at that tank commander was not effective means of conversation. So I was like, I reached down and I picked up a big rock and threw it at him. And I was trying to hit him in the side of the helmet, but even better, it went right across his face, which scared the shit out of him. He turned and looked down, and I gave him the international sign for pivot this way and follow me. And he looked and shrugged his arms and said, I got my own job. Sorry, you're on your own. And pulled his vehicle forward. And just as he rounded that corner, the insurgents would have been just on the back side of these sealant containers. And as he pulled his tank around, they shot him in the side of the head and killed him. So, that problem went. The tank buttoned all the way up and, started kind of driving a little bit erratically, and then still went to the breach. The crew went to where they were supposed to go. And I was like, well, I guess this is going to be our problem to solve. And as we're sitting there, I hear, what are you boys doing? And it was Chief Colbert. Well, last time I'd seen him, he'd gotten hit and hit the ground. And I was worried that he, was dead or at least grievously wounded. But he's up walking around. And I make fun of him. He got shot in the butt. And I guess when you get shot in the butt, it hurts a lot and you'll act like you're dead for a little bit. But I'm elated. I ran over and gave him a hug and he's like, what are you boys doing? I was like, Chief, we know right where they're at. Let's go get them. And he's like, well, okay, let's go. We had one Navy SEAL on the camp. You can't have a war story without a Navy SEAL. So Lieutenant Turnipseed was ours. So he comes running up. Him and Drew had known each other and worked together. So they took that outside track again. And I'm going to lead Chief into this mess. And I go to reload before we go around this corner. Because, obviously I keep running out of ammo. So it's, I'm going to make sure that stops happening. So I go to reload and I can't find any magazines. And I look down and it's because I'm out of ammo. And I pull the magazine out of my rifle and it's only got one round in it. And I was like, well, that ain't good. So I tell Chief, I'm like, he's stacked up behind me. I'm like, Chief, you got to go first. I'm out of ammo. And, he peeps around. He's like, what? I was like, you have to go. You have to take point. I only got one bullet. So you take point and I'll cover you. And he's like, yeah, you're going to cover me with one bullet. But he does. He steps in front of me and we move down to that corner. About that time is when Mike Ollis, a soldier from the 10th Mountain, shows up. He was at the MWR with his guys and, checked to make sure they were all good, heard the gunfight, and has sprinted across the camp with just his combat shirt and his Oakley M-frames. So he comes up behind us and he's like, hey, can we come with you guys? And I remember my first thought was, you only got one magazine, maybe sit this one out. And then I was like, well, that's bold talk for a guy that's only got one bullet. So I remember saying, hey, it's pretty bad, but come on. We step around that corner and get all the way back down to that generator panel, which is also kind of a three-way intersection. And we roll up into it and nothing's on fire. Nobody's shooting at us. Nobody's throwing hand grenades. So, Chief Colbert was probably thinking, these guys really sold. This is a big deal and it seems not that bad. But as we get down to the little concrete apron, you can start to see body parts all over the place. And, there was heads and arms and feet and legs, unidentified, just little grips of meat, little pieces of skin. And I remember looking at probably 3 or 4 pieces of spinal cord just kind of laying out there. And we're looking at all this mess. And as we're looking at it, as an insurgent sits up behind this pile of dead bodies further out and bounce passes 2 hand grenades at us, screams Al Akbar and reaches up and pulls a lanyard on his vest and detonates himself. So at the same time this happens, I assume they had made this plan. Another fighter has taken off sprinting toward the rear of us. And I remember Lieutenant Turnipseed and Drew ran, towards where this guy just detonated to get away from the hand grenades. The hand grenades, his rough throw put one to my front and one to my back. So I was like, well, I guess I'm in the perfect spot to ride these out. And I just remember being very confident that I would be fine. I don't know why. I guess the 15 hand grenades I rode out before that just hadn't hurt me. So I figured, what's 2 more? So I remember seeing this hand grenade run past me and I tucked up to the wall and I remembered I didn't have iPro on. So I was like, well, probably shouldn't look at it. And I just kind of stuck my face to the wall as that grenade detonated. And I remember it hurting deep in my bones. And I remember feeling it in my femurs the most. Like it felt like my bones were splintering. But, I didn't get hit with anything. And as soon as kind of shook it off and I could hear the AK fire behind us now. So I turned around, fired my last 2 rounds at this guy. And, Drew was engaging him from that far angle with his MP5. And whether we hit him or whether he detonated his vest, either way, the result was the same. His vest detonated within a couple, inches or maybe less, or might have actually made it all the way to Mike Ollis. But it detonated and blew Mike Ollis most of the way to me. And, at this point, I had my pocket knife out. My pistol was empty. My rifle was empty. And I had my knife out and I got to, looking around at the tanks are still engaged in this base of fire and the RPGs are still shooting back at the tanks and there's artillery rounds landing all over the camp. And it's like, well, maybe knife fighting isn't the perfect answer for today. So I put my knife up and ran and grabbed Mike and picked him up by his belt and the collar of his shirt and jerked him over to this compound for the UAV compound. Started treating him, his injuries as best I could. and it was bad. And but we're on base, so I figured, instead of keep doing these interventions with my IFAC, I was like, let's just get him to the hospital as soon as possible. Grabbed a civilian and his vehicle, had Mike loaded up, got them moving. He got to the hospital like 90 seconds after he was wounded, which is a better chance than almost anybody would have had. And unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries, which were, traumatic. He ate a suicide vest at point blank range. The 20,000 pound truck, which was supposed to come in the middle of this, grand assault, the truck broke down. So the Taliban attack is kind of stalled out. They have all these fighters on multiple points on the camp. One truck, the second 5,000 pounder, was destroyed by Afghan army. So they don't have this other breach point wherever it was supposed to be. And then the coup de grace of the camp, this 20,000 pounder, has broke down. So at this point, it's kind of a stalemate. They're out in the city, firing into the camp. The Polish QRF is really hitting its stride. They've got their armor out. They've got their birds in the air. So the tide of the battle is starting to turn. And my commander, Major Castor, has shown up at this point, and he's like, the Poles got it. I'm going to consolidate my forces back on the SF camp and figure out, what the bill is, which ended up being incredibly cheap for us. I think everybody that participated in the battle got a Purple Heart. Everybody that did anything other than take shelter in a bunker got some form of valor award. And I was injured enough that I got narcotics, which was hilarious because I was the only person that wasn't directly shot. I got narcotics and got to sleep all night. Nate, Drew, and Mark Colbert got designated as walking wounded. So they got bandages on their bullet holes, and they had to man a machine gun in a tower all night, which was pretty funny to me. Not to them, because Chief had to stand up the entire night because he had a hole in his butt. Every recipient wears their medal differently, and I think when you look at the narratives, that's when you can figure out kind of how that guy's going to feel about it. So while Mike Allis was killed, which is tragic, I didn't know him. I met him on the battlefield, so it wasn't my core group of friends that would have deeply affected me, and it wasn't a death that hit my family hard. All those guys that were there, my kids call him uncle. So when you look at some of these narratives and you realize that half this guy's friends died, and then he gets put up on this altar, that's got to be very uncomfortable. But I didn't have that experience. I took all my friends to the White House with me, and we were kind of in a celebration mode until we got there, because they awarded 3 medals the day I got mine. I was the only person that was present to receive their Medal of Honor. The other 2 were posthumous, which is adds some gravity to it, because we're sitting there, and I got all my friends and we're high-fiving about what a cool event this is, and then you're sitting in between 2 widows and 2 groups of children that their father's gone. Which brings subdued gravity to the occasion. And then the second thing that was just a neat thing for me is I took one of my profound leaders in my career, Tony Bell. He was my sergeant major at the time. I took him with me, and he was just so proud of me. And he told me he was proud of me, and I could see him just kind of looking at me. And that's somebody that I held in such high esteem. To kind of get that reciprocated was very humbling. So somebody told me being a leader is super easy, and he I can't remember who told it to me. And he's like, being a leader is super easy. I was like, yeah. And he's like, everything that your guys do good, you give them credit, and everything that goes wrong, that's your fault. If you do that for your men, you will build a immense following. And so it sounds like a simple thing to do, but then as I've gone through my career, not everybody has the virtue to be able to do that. When something good happens, they want to take credit. And especially as a leader, it's such an easy thing to, in front of your boss, say like, actually, it was this guy or it was these guys. They're the ones that delivered that success. And then to stand in front of that formation when something failed and take that on the chin and be like, yeah, that was my fault. I let that happen. it's such a simple thing, but it's such a unique thing that leaders just don't have. And I think, just the ability to do that, your subordinates instantly notice it and they start to trust you. And then your supervisors, they, it's not lost on them either. Such a simple thing, and it works at all levels. I've never been anywhere in charge of anything where if you just apply that one simple thing has all these cast-off benefits. So if you set in your mind that if this thing fails, I'm going to take credit for the failure, you will be very diligent in making sure that your formation doesn't fail once you've decided that is your course of action that you are going to implement. For me, Memorial Day has always been an important holiday. Coming from a military family, I always understood the gravity of it. For my career, 25 years of it, about 20 years was at war. And I want to say it's, on average, I buried a friend at least once a year since 9/11 has kicked off, roughly. So for me, Memorial Day, I always look at those pictures of those guys. If I get a chance, if they're in Arlington, I like to go see them and throw a coin on the headstone. It's evolved, certainly, for me, especially when I look back at those pictures. In my mind, we're all these fully mature warriors, that met their fate on the battlefield. And then as an older guy and retired now, and I look back at those pictures, about half of them, they're kids. I'm astounded that we even let somebody that young go confront the enemy in armed conflict. So it's a special thing for me to look back and think about those guys I served with, and think about the cost of that war. And also, that something that's unique when I do that, about halfway through my career, there started being widows and kids left over. So I always try to, track them down if I can and tell them a story about their dad. Memorial Day is obviously special for somebody that spent their entire career at war.
That was Master Sergeant Earl Plumlee. Thanks for listening to Warriors in Their Own Words. If you have any feedback, please email the team at kharbaugh@evergreenpodcasts.com. We're always looking to improve the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review. Warriors in Their Own Words is a production of Evergreen Podcasts in partnership with the Honor Project. Our producer is Declan Roars. Bridget Coyne is our production director, and Sean Ruhl-Hoffman is our audio engineer. Special thanks to Evergreen executive producers Joan Andrews, Michael DeAloia, and David Moss. I'm Ken Harbaugh, and this is Warriors in Their Own Words.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not. It's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.